Hello, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us. I had a computer snafu. Welcome back to the Town Hall, which was founded in 1921 by suffragists who wanted to create low-cost or just completely free programming in adult education, and particularly the humanities. As many of you know, by the second month of the Hall, which, by the way, we celebrated our centennial last month, by the first month into the Hall, there was already music in there, and today we are going to talk about one of the most important musical events in our Hall's history, the concert hall debut of Billie Holiday. Today, we have two incredible guests, both very important to me. We have John Szwed, who was a friend of the Town Hall. John has been here earlier this year and last year speaking about Sun Ra and about Alan Lomax. Dr. Muster is the Professor Emeritus of Anthropology, African American Studies, and Film Studies at Yale University, and an adjunct senior research scholar in the Center for Jazz Studies at Columbia University. I think John has worked at every Ivy League institution known to me, at least. Thank you so much, John, for coming. It's a joy to have someone who is such a well-known biographer of so many great jazz artists. Dr. Griffin, Dr. Farah Jasmine Griffin, is the William B. Ransford Professor of English and Comparative Literature and an African American Studies at Columbia University. You may have heard most recently about her because she is the chair of the African American and African Diaspora Studies Department at Columbia, the first chair, and the one who really made that department happen. She has written more articles and books than I can count, but today we'll be honing in on If You Can't Be Free, Be a Mystery, in Search of Billie Holiday. Thank you both so much for being here, and thank you for bearing with me as I disappeared.
We're glad to be here, especially with you, Melay.
Thank you. Well, there's this important date, of course, in our history, but I want to give a little background or learn a little bit more from you all about how Billie Holiday went from this, girl from Philly, Baltimore, to this huge icon. And so if we could just get a little bit about who she was in 1945, 1946, before she gets to our hall. Do you mind, John, just starting us off? Oh, there she is.
It's easier to talk about the later Billie Holiday than the earlier Billie Holiday. It's a very complex life, and to my sense, often hardly believable. But then I've always picked people to write about who I couldn't quite believe were real. But in her case, everything went wrong in her life. In fact, let me say it out front. The thing I really was drawn to about her was reading her autobiography and realizing that every institution in America had failed her. And it's the most complete critique of American life and political culture that I've ever read. I mean, that sounds crazy to say, but if you read it, and she's not throwing it in your face, and she's not, throwing blame about. She's just simply saying how it went. And to say that things failed her is putting it very mildly. She had, I think, one of the most miserable lives that anyone had ever read about or had some sense of, and yet somehow triumphed in ways that were just quite remarkable. And even when I wrote about them, I thought, is this right? Can this possibly be Town Hall, for example? Can this really be right that she filled Town Hall, that they used people on the stage and then turned away 1,000 people outside when she couldn't work in a bar in town? Anyway, I'm not starting from the beginning, I'm starting from the backside, but I think you get my point.
Well, yeah, just in the 40s, she's a recording star. She's winning, or she's coming to the top of a lot of music polls. Farah, can you just give us a sense of where she was at financially, where she was in 46? Who is she before the films come out? before the major trial? Who is she at this point?
So by the time she comes to town hall, she's a star. She's become a star. She, as a young woman, was singing in Harlem, singing in a lot of the clubs and the after hours joints there. She, of course, makes her Cafe Society debut in '39. She's recorded her early sides. She started to record with her own band. She's been with Count Basie and Artie Shaw by '46. I mean, she's a well-known, popular singer in demand, with already a body of work behind her. But the town hall, so there, people know who Billie Holiday is when she gets to town hall, which is why there's so many people there. She has a following. She has a base. She's a celebrity, a beautiful, stylish celebrity. The sort of scandals that would come later on have not yet come. And this was a chance to see her in a very different setting. So that's what it was seeing someone you knew as a popular singer, with some of the best bands, and having already cut her early sides with Teddy Wilson and all of that. That's all behind her. And this is a chance to see her in a different setting. So it's the sort of next step of that career.
Well, there's something here also, and I read it in both of your work, and definitely especially yours, John, about the change in the music as well. The music changes in the mid-40s. When do the strings come in? When does it stop maybe being a little bit more of like the hipster's favorite to, a little bit more grand dame-ish or grand dame?
Yeah. Well, it's sad to say that in the history of this music, there was always a prejudice against strings. I mean, as a child, I knew this. I knew that people would say Charlie Parker ruined his career when he played with strings. People listen to it now and say these are magnificent performances. They're wonderful. What was the problem? There were these lines drawn between musics which are quite remarkable, and that success in one didn't make it necessarily a success in the other. When she moved over to Decca Records, I think it's the period you're talking about, and strings were used, they had already had a huge output of hardcore jazz. Now, hardcore meaning at the time, quite traditional jazz, and very acceptable to that audience, and had just had a few hits. And in comes Billie Holiday, with someone they think can find a place between those two spots. Now, I think at the time, most people would have thought this is not going to work. You're going to lose one audience or the other. But in fact, she didn't lose the audience. And her life has been filled, I think, with a number of such moves where people were trying to outthink the producers and her and think that they somehow knew what her career should be like. But she was creating herself, and at all of these points, I don't believe it's fair to say that at any point she was doing material she really disliked, which is more than you can say for Frank Sinatra, for example, who did some really loathsome pieces. We're not going to bring up how much is that doggy in the window kind of thing, but it was that bad. Her material was always good. Even when the songs weren't good, she made them good.
Well, I do want to get into the town hall and that get a little bit into what the set list said about where she wanted to be and where her team wanted to be in her career, and also as part of her myth making. So, something that I was reading about with this show was one that it was just so rare for jazz artists to have entire concerts on a stage like this, not as part of a band, but as the lead on stage, and that she really was one of the first. Can you just talk a little bit about her stage persona?
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of people, you had to see her either in very small settings or as a side piece to an orchestra or a big band. What is it for her to take the main stage? Farah, would you mind?
Sure. I mean, I think we have to think about a man named Greer Johnson. John writes about him, and he's in the book with Billie. There's a kind of transcription, a beautiful, it's not fair to call it a transcription, but a setting of his interview about Billie Holiday. And so when we think about teams, I mean, really, I don't, John, I think this is true. I don't think it was a team. I mean, I think it was Greer Johnson who was very devoted to her. He was a devoted fan and a very devoted friend. And he decided that she was, he had a notion of what a serious artist was. And he decided that she was a very serious artist of the caliber of, the actress Marlene Dietrich or, the great cabaret and concert singers. And so that he actually sets up the town hall gig and everything about it, the song selections. These are songs that she had been identified with, but she didn't always sing all of those songs in the same set. Like there was much more variety in her sets. But this is primarily her torch songs, for instance. And this, the kind of seriousness of a concert artist, kind of presenting her in that way, not in the jazz club setting or the dance hall setting or something like that. And that was largely Greer Johnson. And I think even that photograph that you showed, which is one of the more, it's just beautiful. It's one of the more iconic photographs of Billie Holiday that people think of. That's from the Robin Parsons session, where he took those, many photographs. You'll see the same gardenia, the same hairstyle, but maybe she has on sequins, or she has on maybe 3 different outfits. And that was set up by Greer Johnson. And so, both the photograph, the set, the choice of town hall, the staging of it, marks a kind of shift in the way that she's being presented as an artist. And I think it has a lot to do with what Greer thinks of as what serious artists deserve in terms of how they present it.
It was kind of outrageous that, well, first of all, I think it's fair to say that very few singers got a big performance. If they could fill a hall like that as solo figures. That's one thing to begin with. But Greer actually thought she could sing art song. They could make arrangements in which she could match up the very best classical singers of the time. He was deep into this, although he was wise enough to point, when he was trying to convince her to do it, to point to Lani Lenya, who had actually crossed into in the pop range. She hadn't gone as far as Bobby Darin, and one of my favorite recordings, Lani Lenya and Louis Armstrong, in which he instructs her on how to phrase. True. That was 10 years later. The idea that he was serious. She could be a classical singer in every sense of it. And his big move was to say, I'm not inviting any pop or jazz writers to come and review. I'm only going to bring in classical people. And I thought at first when I saw that, yeah, well, you can say that. But then I found that at a later program, it was filled with just those people that he called on. The Times Classical Review, the Herald Tribune, etc., Brooklyn Eagle, and with Leonard Bernstein and other people like that. So he was really getting in these classical people. And they were all saying this was great. I mean, you couldn't do that today, I don't believe. I'm almost certain of that. And I think, I'm trying to think, I think only one writer said, well, the songs were really, it would have been nice to hear a couple up-tempo things, but that's not what he wanted. He wanted a song cycle, as they call them in classical music, which is a mood maintained through an entire evening. And the songs would be within the same kind of arrangements and same kind of setting through the whole thing. And it would have blown it if you had put in something loud and up-tempo. And one can't imagine, fine and mellow coming after some of those songs. This was also daring. Can you hold an audience for what, an hour and a half? And needless to say, it was not something she wanted to do particularly.
Well, it's interesting also looking at the press from that time, and some of the anticipation definitely is coming from the Black press. This is from the Afro-American. But you're right. Some of the more, I guess, striking reviews are from classical, reviewers, including this upcoming review from the New York Times. And what's interesting, and I ask both of you this, I think oftentimes she's described as being like a sad singer, or, even her torch songs are being described as the blues, which is a whole other conversation to have. But there's, this emphasis on charm in a lot of her reviews. I think is also really interesting, that there is charm in her phrasing, that there's oftentimes humor in her phrasing. Can you speak a bit about that as well? Not just Billie Holiday, the sad torch singer, but that there's more going on there, more nuance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that she's an, it's helpful to read these reviews because we do have that received notion of her kind of sad singer singing the blues, But she is an artist and she is constructing a certain kind of persona, a stage persona. She's an actress, right? She's playing a role. She's setting a certain kind of mood. She's also one of the most charismatic performers. Just incredible charisma, with bringing all the full range of emotion that includes humor and charm and flirtation and all of those things that she brings to. I like to think of her inhabiting those songs in the way a great actress would inhabit a role. And I think that the town hall concert is one of those concerts that allows her to do that.
Well, interesting in thinking about the set list, for example, you're absolutely right. It seems, at least from the reviews and what I can find out elsewhere, that it is, I Cover the Waterfront, The Man I Love, Body and Soul, Embraceable You, God Bless the Child, of course. But Strange Fruit is on this set list, and it's performed at both performances that evening. There were two that evening, both sold out. But Strange Fruit isn't performed more than, I don't know, 20 times in her entire career, performed live. And I was wondering if we could take just a moment to talk about Strange Fruit throughout her life, and then Strange Fruit, and of course, her relationship to the state, which of course is something that we'll be talking about, a lot over the next few months with the new Lee Daniels film that's coming out. But Strange Fruit as bringing her attention that may have led to other kinds of detention, specifically from the FBI's narcotics bureau. Can we talk about Strange Fruit for a minute?
Sure.
Yeah.
Lenny Bruce used to say that every night he had reviewers from the FBI or the police at his club. And he said even worse than that, they would do his routine in the court and always get the lines wrong. And he was joking, but it's absolutely true. They had people assigned to do, in effect, reviews. I can't stress this. Well, I can stress it even harder. There is an entire book written on Louie. I'm sure some of you don't know that song. It was recorded 2,000 times. It doesn't have much to it, but the FBI thought there was something there. So for a full year, they assigned people to figure out what the song was about. I mean, what can I say? My father would have said, that's where our tax money going? Sending people to clubs and buying records? And by the way, has anyone ever figured out what Louie is about? Except that well, let me not go into that, but the writer he was doing a Frank Sinatra version, believe that or not, originally. Set him up, Joe, that kind of thing. Anyway, this song, to say that it broke all the rules, it broke the rules of comportment for an audience. It re-educated people in a stunning and frightening way in some respect, because you had to, you go out for an evening, particularly a place like Cafe Society, where she was introducing it first. It was a pretty chic place, and it was an interracial club, but it was basically for people with some money. And they came very well dressed, and it was a big thing to be there. A lot of famous people. You were in the middle of the show that contained some blues material, perhaps some some sultry songs, some fast up tempo songs, and suddenly the lights come down, and there's just one little pin spot on this woman's face, and the music seems to be coming from some other place. And they carefully structured it so that when it ended, nothing could follow it, and they had a sort of outro kind of thing, and they had to come back and start over again because the whole mood would be shaken. You don't often hear in theater talk about things that are actually shocking in the sense that no one could predict where they were coming from. I've heard people talk about Marlon Brando and stage performance in Streetcar Named Desire, and people were coming out to the first act and say, "What is that?" Because no actor had ever acted that way on a stage. It was beyond saying, "Oh, I don't like that." It was, "What is it?" And in this case, they knew what the words meant. There's no question about that, although some people were trying to fuzz it kind of thing. I can't imagine what it felt like at that moment, except that it was something you were bound to take home and tell people about, and it would echo its way down through history so that we know that somehow or other it's been re-recorded again and again and again.
I agree with John. I can't say it any better than that. And I think that she, by the time she sings it, it makes perfect sense to me that it's on the set list. Because her performance of it is so dramatic, and the staging that John just described, where it's the last song of the night, there's a pin light on her face, and at the end she walks off the stage. There's drama, right? And so given that the set list here at Town Hall is creating a certain kind of drama, a certain kind of presentation of a persona, a kind of song cycle. Strange Fruit to me, in the way that she performed it, is perfectly fitting in that kind of set. So to me, it makes sense that she would have, that it would have been part of the repertoire of Town Hall.
Well, another thing about Strange Fruit that John and I talked briefly about was the idea that she didn't understand it, which, one of the writers had said, and John had said, there's a possibility that people said that in order not to implicate her in the controversy of the song, because it's hard to imagine that she did not actually understand what she was singing about, as intelligent as we know her to be. But this, for me, brings up the question of her earlier on in her career, maybe earlier in the 40s, the hipster's favorite, the literary favorite, thinking about her in conversation with, but also adored by literary figures like William Faulkner and others. Can you talk about her as a cultural figure outside even of the milieu of pop singing and Billboard?
She's always a literary favorite. She's a literary favorite all the way through, Baraka, and the most haunting poem is The Day Lady Died, right? And Baraka's Dark Lady of the Sonnet. So she's always a literary favorite. I think poets hear that she's a poet in her phrasing. She's a poet. Greer Johnson, who we're talking about, used to go hear her with Elizabeth Hardwick. Elizabeth Hardwick was his friend, and they used to run around New York going to listen to her. And Elizabeth Hardwick writes very powerfully about hearing Billie Holiday in one of her fictional pieces. So she's early on, I think, embraced by a certain set of artists, Marianne Moore, Orson Welles, sort of innovative, experimental artists who recognize her to be similar, and recognize jazz, that impulse in jazz as well. So by 46, yes, she's beloved by many artists, but that will be the case throughout her life and her career, and not just musical artists. She influences poets, she influences writers.
Right here, we've got this booking bill, which I just love, with all of these hand-drawn images of her. And of course, it mentions the Town Hall concert. But perhaps what's more interesting to me is everything that happens after the concert. So now she's going on tour into different kinds of spaces, and she reaches kind of the what we might call the concert hall mecca, but only after. I mean, a kind of story that you couldn't write, which is that she reaches Carnegie Hall because she can't perform in clubs because of her conviction, which is, I mean, it's wild. You can't believe that this is someone's life. Um, I'm interested in, though, when the public finds out, when the state makes it clear, when the public finds out about this vulnerability of hers, her addiction, and how that at the same time as being now a concert artist, not a clubs artist, but a concert artist, how these happen at the same time. So what kind of myth is being made with maybe without even her participation, but then also what is she constructing from that? Would you mind taking that on, John?
Her own line was, "They come to see me fall on my ass," and I think that was obviously not true of everyone, but they built this. This was we complain about the internet and social media and its shortcomings is too weak a word. But you know, this was laid much earlier in the press, and when you had without naming particular papers, which nobody will remember, but they were beginning to have magazines who existed only to expose people, their frailties, their imaginary sins, and she was one of them who was particularly singled out for this kind of treatment. Now it struck me trying to think back on that time. There was no way it could be ducked. Now that we have these kind of pet phrases like "walked back" and misspoke and so on. You're not going to say that the FBI is on me and I misspoke. I mean, go back further to say that the object at that point was to show that anybody could be arrested for using marijuana or even only recently made illegal drugs. I mean, marijuana was only, cocaine went a long time without being made illegal. A lot of drugs that were used in the military were still legal. There was an attempt to try to show that anybody could be picked up. So someone like Gene Krupa, the band leader, who was not only arrested for using marijuana, a couple sticks or whatever, but he was in jail for a long time for it, for an extraordinarily long time with lots of bad press. Robert Mitchum, was a big star. People on the set trying to show that he was high when they were making films. So they're aiming very high and very broad to nail these people in a very unpleasant way. And it's hard to believe that anyone could have not known about this at the time. She tried to balance against this. She wrote her own pieces several times. She was in a number of magazines of 6 or 7, which are very hard to find nowadays, basically African-American magazines that are worth reprinting because of the great stuff they had in them. She wrote really personal things about this, and I think she made ebony at least once in one of these prisons. Is that right? I can't remember the headline. Do you remember what it was on that?
Well, she gets. I think one of them, when she's on the cover, she's like, "I'll never use drugs again," and then there's another one later on. Both of them after arrest, and they're sort of PR pieces trying to. Oh, the one later on is around the time that the autobiography comes out.
Well, what I was struck by is that Ethel Waters has had an equally difficult childhood, maybe worse if you see things that way. Did lots of outrageous things all through her career that are worth following, by the way, when she seems to be on this side a holy lady, on this side suddenly she introduces something very unholy into her performance. It's very difficult to understand without thinking that she's jerking people around. But anyway, she, on the other hand, and brought out her book, and rather than being banned as people wanted hers, Billie Holiday's banned, hers was in Reader's Digest. It was serialized. It was distributed in armed forces overseas because she was a holy lady now. And they got this Billy Graham thing going for her. Billie never apologized. She never said, like her would-be early biographer said, "Why did you do this?" We won't go into the details of it, but when you write about it, you have to say, You can't be too close to her. I think you can't say what I would have done or what my friends would have done. This is really deep stuff, and um, you can. I'm trying to imagine now. You were straightening me out earlier, Millie, about how stars now, singing stars, are closer to their fans than they were. And they carry on conversations in social media, and the reviewers pour through their lyrics to see what their life is like going at a particular time. There's no idea of any kind of artistry there. Just how miserable were you on that occasion? When I was working with Alan Lomax, he said to me one day off the wall, as he often would do these things, every song in the Western world is a protest song. I'm thinking fast. Think about this. And I said, what about love songs? Especially love songs, he said. Well, then I started looking up, and damn it, it's not true. How many love songs are popular? And then I saw David Bowie say one day, someone said, are your songs really as dark as they seem? Nah, he said, I'm a really happy guy. But am I going to stand up there and say, hey, look at me, I'm so happy, and look at your miserable lives? No way. I'll be more miserable than they are.
Well, it brings up two. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Because that Billie had to live out this stuff.
Yeah.
Forget about people reading the lyrics. They assumed already that was the case. And look, let's not leave out Gloomy Sunday, a song about suicide, which is banned, right? In fact, I used to say to myself, if I were a producer of songs, of young singers, and said, I know he could be a star. We're going to do a song about suicide, one about lynching, and one about this poor girl. And by the way, you'll sing off beat all the time, but okay. That's crazy. But she had hits. Just remarkable. You can't say that. Can we say that Strange Fruit was a hit in the long run? It was, right?
In the long run, I think it was, yeah. And I think that it's always interesting. She's arrested the first time in 1947, right? And then you're right, that Carnegie Hall concert comes after that. But she is her fans love her. She's beloved, and they are on the one hand, people are trying to make a lesson and an example out of her. But on the other hand, the fact that she's being treated so badly endears her to her audiences. Mm-hmm. And so you listen to the recordings from those Carnegie Hall concerts, and she comes on stage and like they're basically giving her standing ovation before she opens her mouth. It's like, we're so glad you're here. We're here for you. We're with you. And so, there is a real kind of devotion after that arrest, and an understanding that she's there because her livelihood is being challenged because she can't sing in the clubs. They've taken away her cabaret club.
Well, it's interesting to, as someone who, all three of us, none of us could see her live, but how much she's lived on in the televised performances, and of course her studio recordings, but also live recordings. And also I think there are very few people whose Carnegie concerts are legend. It's like her, Judy Garland, Nina Simone. Really the stuff of like folklore. And I was wondering, when you think of this period, 46 really to 58, where her image moves from, just the flat image, the Carl Van Vechtens and all the other great images in magazines, Downbeat, all of that. We also get to see her in moving image on television in New Orleans, and some other. Or can you talk about the legacy of her movement and her what we can see of her stage presence just in these jazz performances on I say online, but on television?
I was just saying to someone that in a different world where options would have been available to Black women in Hollywood beyond playing maids, or even with Lena Horne, who doesn't have to play a maid, but has to be, unless she's in an all-Black film, has to be in a sequence that she can be taken out of when the film is shown in the South. In a world that's not like that, right? I would imagine that that Billie might have become a real movie star. The camera loves her. The camera loves her. She is photogenic. She's exquisite. She's all those things we talk about in the performances. If you look at, particularly in New Orleans, she's charming. She's cute. She's funny. She's coy. She's everything we like in our actresses of that period. And in a different world, there would have been movie roles for her. So I think she could have been a real star of film. We do get a sense of even that extraordinary performance, The Sound of Jazz, which is toward the end. You can't take your eyes off of her in that recording. I mean, you're watching her watch the guys she's singing with, and you're watching them watch her, but you can't take your eyes off of her. And it's not during the kind of peak of her career. But I think I think we're very fortunate to have her on film, because we get a sense of how photogenic and how much film loves her. It's a whole new dimension to who she is and to the performance.
I was thinking of, I don't want to call it a cool style, but she had a minimalist style. The smallest motion was paid attention to. It was just, if their hands were snapping, they weren't really snapping. It was a gestural thing. When I was a kid, I saw Ellington once say, if you're really cool, how did he do this? He said, you can snap your fingers, but that's not really cool. You're really cool, you'll tilt your head like this. But if you're extremely cool, you'll pull your earlobe rhythmically. Well, he's talking about people's behavior in the audience and so on. Now, I was thinking at one point, is this crazy that Dorothy Dandridge could play that same kind of cool, I don't want to say distant, resistant kind of character. The character she played in Carmen Brown, where she doesn't want to go along with the Pearl Bailey and the crowd that she's operating in, the way she holds back all the while. I don't know. I just sort of thinking you could cast Billie Holiday in those same kind of parts. Is that crazy?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. I mean, and I think that they were friends. They knew each other. Dorothy Dandridge hoped to play Billie Holiday. There was talk immediately of the book Lady Sings the Blues being made into a movie, and Dorothy Dandridge wanted that role and should have gotten it. And then they started talking about letting Ava Gardner and Lana Turner play it. So, and it wouldn't get made until the 70s.
Well, Ava, in my time, Ava was thought to be black, but let's not go into
it. She encouraged that rumor on occasion.
Not quite the same thing, but the sisters trio from New Orleans, Connie Boswell, the Boswell sisters, when they came to New York, they were from an upper middle class, it was a pretty straight family with good classical training. They kept saying to the interviewers, "Tell everybody we're Creole."
Yes.
Why not?
That's very funny. Well, bringing up Dorothy Dandridge, I know that from her passing until the film was actually made, with Halle Berry as its star, every Black actress seemed to want to play her. And of course, there are some who were very vocal about it, especially in the 90s. There have been many depictions of Billie Holiday on stage and on film. There's, of course, the very, very famous Diana Ross depiction. I've been thinking about the way that women who have difficult lives, who are artists, are portrayed in film, particularly Edith Piaf, and how oftentimes their bite gets taken out, or the ways in which they actually did survive. And that as much as things happened to them, they also made things happen. So the idea of, possibly being a rape survivor, and also somewhat willful in your own decision to be a prostitute. Yeah, I'm thinking, this is Billie Holiday, of course. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about our memory or the narratives that we have of Billie Holiday, also in the context of other women, artists like her. Where do you place, or how do you manage in your mind, or how do you imagine, how do you conceptualize her life as not just, the list of things that happened to her, um, but a life that was lived with agency?
I think that there are sort of received narratives that we have, and that as we move on, the narratives become more available to complexity, but that people are complex, and they are not easily contained by the narrative that are available. And so in those early portrayals of Billie Holiday, and particularly the 72 film, in order to make her, there's a kind of respectability that she has to fit into. And to the extent that we know the real Billie Holiday does not fit those politics of respectability, in order to come up with a reason why they don't, is you have to make them seem tragic or victims, right? It's because she was a victim, because she was tragic, because she was treated badly, not because she chose it, right? There are certain things that she chose. She didn't choose her victimization. But how do we make room for someone who, I can't think of someone who was less unapologetic than Billie Holiday about, I think John said this earlier, she's absolutely unapologetic. She's like, I don't have any regrets. Who can say that? How many people can get to the end of their lives and say, I don't have any regrets? I made some choices, and this is why I made them, right? And so we're beginning to get to the place where our representations of complex people can allow for that. But I think that oftentimes our theories and our narratives really have to confine and narrow people who explode beyond those categories and aren't always what we want them to be at all. And so I think that's what has happened over the years. And hopefully now we're getting to be at a place where we can have a bit more complexity in our understanding about who she was, and who many women, or many people are. The contradictions, that make them the people and the artists they are.
You mentioned No Regrets. The thing that always struck me was the two songs with that title, slightly different in French. Edith Piaf's No Regrets and Billie Holiday's. Well, I hadn't heard her version, Billie, so I went looking for it, and I was stunned by the difference. There is something peculiar about the Piaf version, in which she's saying basically she has lots of regrets. No, but it's triumphantly put. There's a big band behind her, and it gets louder and louder. And I wasn't surprised to find out that without going into the details of it, a rump group of soldiers who planning an overthrow of the French government at one point, and they were sent out as, I don't know, to work in the deserts or something. They marched to this song of No Regrets, which was, basically it is about regrets. The Billie Holiday song is first of all up tempo.
Yep.
And it's kind of cheerful. And she's saying, well, it didn't work out, and I got burned, but hey, life goes on, and I'm enjoying myself.
Exactly. That's the thing. When I was coming up, I came to the Billie Holiday No Regrets through Phoebe Snow's No Regrets. Phoebe Snow recorded No Regrets, and I love that album, Poetry Man, and all of that. So then I learned that actually Billie Holiday recorded, and I think Lady records it twice, maybe. But that recording, it really does. It's like, throw your cares to the wind. It's completely upbeat, right? No regrets, right? Although our love affair has gone astray, like, okay. And
what we'd all like, right?
Exactly. And there's one of the interviews toward the end of her life where she's saying that, she's saying she's unapologetic. People are uncomfortable about this. She's unapologetic about her drug use. She's like, yeah, I used it. And in fact, maybe she says in one of those interviews, she says, Maybe that's why I haven't killed anybody. I mean, just
Well, I started to say at the beginning, her book is an indictment of all these institutions. Just doesn't hammer you with it, but she makes it clear to you that she couldn't get drug treatment in a hospital in New York because New York would not, no city hospital would take people with drug addiction. It wasn't an illness. So she had to go to an expensive private place, which was helped by, I believe, a Swiss or French doctor. So how can you, when you say, I'm being punished for this, but then I can't get over it. And then she goes to jail thinking that she'll get out. A bad mistake, probably pushed mostly by her manager. And she knew about places like Lexington where a lot of musicians had gone to get over it. Miles Davis even tried to get into it. You had to have committed a crime to get in, which is interesting. Miles wouldn't fabricate a crime, so he never went in. But she went to this place, was it in Maryland or somewhere, which was hardcore. I mean, slopping hogs and washing dishes and stuff. She didn't sing for a year. He totally lost a year of her life. Now that would be a film. Billie Holiday in prison.
Right, where she did not sing a note. The only time that it's reported that she did not sing a note while she was there. In Alderson.
Mm. And I know that she believed, I think it was in one of her last interviews, she believed that her voluntary trip to the cure is what set possibly the feds off, but definitely let people know that she was struggling with drug abuse, and that ultimately would lead to a conviction. So, I mean, talk about a society in which you're, criminalized for even trying to help yourself.
Well, I think John was right when he opens up. It's, when you look at her life, and even if you look at any part of her life, but especially how she was dealt with as a person who suffered from addiction, it is an absolute indictment of this society, absolute indictment of our society, and of the war on drugs. That is completely lacking in compassion, that was never about justice, that was not about helping people get well. It's an absolute indictment.
Well, people, I think, are always interested in this part of her life, and definitely interested in her drug use, the incarceration. But now they'll be even more so because of the film that's coming out that just, I guess it'll be on Hulu in 2 weeks or so. And my question about even that is, with women, of course, who are incarcerated, or with women artists who struggle with drug abuse, besides possibly what you're talking about with the Ethel Waters, conversion, or now I'm a holy woman thing, what kind of room is there for the complicated women artist, the women artists who may be taking part in crimes, the women artist who is unapologetic about drug use, who may be unapologetic about sexual behaviors? Do you think that since Holiday's time in prison, since the time that she got out, that there was a way for her to make a narrative around that, or to create participate in this myth of the tragic woman that she actually gave into,
I think she did. I mean, I think, she gave into it. I mean, I don't think she ever gave into it in her life. I think she gave into it in the presentation of her life. In the presentation of the autobiography, in the presentation of some of those stories, like the Ebony story, right? I think she, that in the marketing of her life, I think she gave into it. I don't think she gave into it herself. I think that she always maintained a sense of understanding of herself and of how she was being wronged, but never dwelling in that, never dwelling in it. But yeah, I think to the extent that it might have sold some newspapers and sold some stories and, helped create a kind of public relations narrative, Yeah, I think she did.
It's interesting to think about singers today, particularly those who speak with respect to them, that are nonetheless, well, let's see, who can I start with? Well, it's not, Lady Gaga hasn't done a Billie Holiday tune, I think, but she's done things close to it. If you saw her at the Academy Awards when she did Lush Life, Billy Strayhorn's thing, which is a very sad song, and it goes down at the end, down the last words are where I'll live with the lives of those whose lives are lonely too. And she takes it up as triumph, throws her arms out. Barbra Streisand. Okay, Barbra Streisand apologizes several times when she does Billie Holiday material because she said a woman shouldn't be treated like that. But she sings it, which is, I don't know, what do you make of that? That it's okay as long as you don't believe I do it? You know, there were a lot of songs in the, let's face it, a lot of songs in Broadway in the 30s and 40s that dealt with pimps and their prostitutes. There were French songs before that time, and Holiday knew that stuff. And in fact, I quit, was working on my book. I quit at the point where I realized I'd have to come to terms with cabaret stuff because it's so rich. I mean, there's songs that make fun of those songs, you know, that where singers pretend to be prostitutes and then mock prostitutes who bemoan their situation. There are all kinds of twists and turns to this stuff. So now we have situations where people have to apologize for singing a song they obviously want to perform because they almost you to think I'm not like Billie Holiday. You know?
Or change the lyrics. I think about Ain't Nobody's Business, which is a Bessie Smith song and a Billie Holiday song, and how other artists, more contemporary artists, change the lyrics because they don't want to talk as if they are accepting a certain kind of domestic violence or something like that. But one of my favorite things to listen to, for instance, I've seen about John talking about songs about prostitutes. 3 versions of Love for Sale. When I want to teach students about, you know, how an artist interprets a standard and how the interpretation of the standards, same lyrics, give you completely different meanings. So listen to Ella Fitzgerald singing Love for Sale. She sounds like, you know, a little hoard of gold, right? Like, and how does she possibly get to be selling love? Like, how is that possible? You know, and it doesn't sound so bad, right? Or Dinah Washington, who sounds like a tornado, like, you know. And then Billie Holiday, who just sounds like she's been up and down those stairs a lot. And are you sure you want to follow her up them? You know. And so, you know, that they each in their interpretation give us a way of telling a story, of inhabiting a character without having to apologize for it. Or having to say, don't mistake this for me, you know. They just inhabit that persona that they're performing.
There's some, I wanted to do this, I know I'll never live long enough to do it, but talk about the kind of massive misunderstanding of songs caused by the shifting of media and the source of things. So a lot of popular songs came from Broadway and from musicals and so forth, in which they were already set in kind of recognizable situations, and then they reach the point where they're detached from that and it becomes something else. I mean, off the top of my head, I can think of things like where the song literally becomes Broadwayized or edited, not because they had to, but because they wanted to make it more acceptable to their audiences. I'm thinking of Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, which is from a Broadway show, and it's all about a woman talking about how she fell in love with a guy who's completely undesirable in every respect. And she spells it out in no uncertain sexual terms. At the end, she gets rid of the guy because he loses his money, and now she trashes him through the last part. So how did everybody get stuck with that little loser and so forth? Well, that song has been adjusted so that the lines are incredibly different. Let me see if I can think of one off the top of my head. It's about, I shouldn't sleep, I wouldn't sleep. Love told me I couldn't sleep. You know those lines? The original lines were, I slept where I shouldn't have slept. Now, nobody changed that formally. It was done informally. Tangerine is a song about a woman who swept people off their feet in Argentina. It was a pop song in the 40s, but they live out the second part, which is where someone refutes everything she says. They rhyme, instead of Argentine, they rhyme. The label of her blouse said Macy's mezzanine, rhyming it with you. She was a complete fake. There were all kinds of songs about debunking women who were faking the, one from my childhood. You Came a Long Way from St. Louis, which is about a woman who has made claims about her past. And this guy is from St. Louis too, and he knows who she was. And he's basically saying, you broke a lot of hearts in between, but it's not going to be me. And the punchline of the song is, I'm from Missouri too, so naturally I've got my doubts. Well, I don't know anybody knows it was what Show Me stage. So these songs are all constructed around mocking certain kinds of characters, men and women, and so forth. There's some way to talk about this, I guess, where audiences, so far, John Lennon's Imagine hasn't gone through this, but is some church going to say, wait a minute, we're really not going to say no more churches, are we? Remember that? In our countries? They're still singing. I mean, I put that down to say they don't know what the words mean, but...
Yeah. Well, it also goes back to this tendency now, especially in pop culture, for all new songs to be treated like biography. And you even see now, I forget what state it is, that rap lyrics can now be used in court trials. So as evidence, which, the idea of a vocalist or a musician putting on a character in order to perform a song, and everything not being so navel gazing, frankly, it seems, I don't know, I think we're getting to interesting territory now, but I don't think it's new. I think it's been happening over the last few decades. And so my question for you two is, when you think about Billie Holiday's legacy as a performer, and in particular as a live performer, we're talking about stage presence. We're also talking about screen presence, but stage presence, the ability to perform as though you are an actress and take a stage in that very specific way. Who do you see as her children?
I always say that there's before Billie Holiday, like BH, and after Billie Holiday. That she, she's one of the architects of modern pop singing, certainly jazz singing. She's one of the architects. So, my book on Billie Holiday, I end with a kind of list of all the artists, I think, who come through her, and whether it be Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Peggy Lee, Abby Lincoln, Cassandra Wilson, Erykah Badu, Madeline Perot, that it's hard to even imagine American popular singing without imagining Billie Holiday. She helps to shape it, and also instrumental music. They're instrumentalists who are listening to her and learning from her phrasing. So I think all of those people kind of are part of her legacy. Not only the ones who kind of lay behind the beat, but a certain kind of coolness and all of those things. I mean, I think when Erykah Badu, who's most often associated with Billie Holiday, when she did the verses with Shot, they talk about Billie Holiday, or even when Patti LaBelle and Gladys Knight did theirs, they talk about Billie Holiday. And then you have, the singers who we don't even think of, like the stage presence of Alina Horn singing in those nightclubs in a certain way, or Diane Carroll, even. That those sort of nightclub possibilities are, and that way of presenting oneself is opened up because of Billie Holiday, too.
I think it's right. Amy Winehouse comes to mind, but that's a sad case. She actually thought she was Billie Holiday. It seems to some
too seriously, right?
Yeah. She was willing to take on the role if you wanted to hand it to her. I don't know. By the way, is it crazy to say that the early Doris Day sounded like Billie Holiday?
I think she definitely sounded like Billie Holiday.
The later one,
she was definitely listening to her. Yeah.
Now, the real irony, and it's more than irony, is that Joe Stafford was a more popular singer than she was. No one remembers Joe Stafford today, and yet Billie liked her a lot.
Liked her a
And
lot.
even maybe
She did not like Peggy Lee
right.
because she thought Peggy Lee stole from her and was too busy trying to be her.
So uh, she said at one point that because she's from the South, which is Kentucky, I don't know, but the thing is, they were radically different singers. They were both very precise in the diction and so forth, which is worth mentioning at this point, by the way, that her favorite singer was Louis Armstrong, who was Mr. Anti-Diction. Forget that. This is the street. I'm talking like I talk. But she constructs her. You could never confuse that she's used the wrong word or you're missing something. She even revised Porgy and Bess songs, when there were two, obviously, Uncle Thomas or whatever. So here's a singer who has a very pure voice, has some nice songs, and she respected her voice. And she used to lose polls in African American neighborhoods. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Chicago Defender was one of them. Pittsburgh, I forget. There wasn't a great difference, but they were slightly ahead. And I could never square this with, and even Ella always beat her out. I mean, Ella was, the little girl next door much of the time, right? Like you're saying, I mean, she still had the tisket to tasket.
Yes.
Well, before we go, we have a real. Oh, sorry, John. What were you saying?
You made that little girl thing work good.
Oh, she made it work. She made it work until she was an old woman.
We have just two questions before we wrap up. Wesley Palmer Curl asks, would love to hear our guests talk about Lady Day and her career as compared and contrasted to the two other members of the oft-described Holy Trinity of jazz singers, Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan. I would note that Sarah Vaughan did perform at Town Hall and actually has a recording with Count Basie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But even as a child, taking jazz classes and music appreciation, all this in conservatory, we were taught that was the Trinity, but we were never taught to listen carefully necessarily to Billie Holiday records. It was Ella Fitzgerald. If you want to learn technique, if you want to learn flexibility, and sometimes you listen to Sarah Vaughan just to learn about different kinds of uses of tone and improvisation. But Ella is the one, because she's the virtuoso, that, at least in my education, music education, teachers steers you towards.
I think Ella, but Ella and Sarah loved Billie. They loved her and listened to her all the time. And they're just, they're just so different. All three of them, they're just very different. They have different capacities. I think that for the emotional range, I don't think anybody can beat Billie Holiday at all. And she can improvise without ever scatting. She never scats. Ella Fitzgerald scats. When I was in Europe talking to some aspiring jazz vocalists, they all want to be Ella Fitzgerald. They all want to scat out of context. Like, no, it gotta have some meaning. There's gotta be a reason why you're scatting. But I think that Ella is probably more easily recognizable to people as a jazz vocalist. This is what jazz vocalists do. And Sarah was really able to take that concert stage part and run with it, right? And do, to the point where they called Send in the Clowns a jazz aria. So, they're each extraordinary artists in their own right and have earned their stature as royalty of not just American music, but, contemporary music. I mean,
We have another question before we head out from Lee. What was Billie Holiday's influence on Willie Nelson? His pull his pulls and pushes his phrases and resolves, and he resolves a phrase like her. He pulls and pushes his phrases and resolves a phrase like her. I don't know this.
I'm going to go listen to him tonight. Something. I mean, I listened to Willie Nelson, but I've never listened to him thinking about Billie Holidays. John, have you?
I know the singing. I'll do that too. But I will say, if we're going to count Willie Nelson, we should count Bob Dylan.
Yes. Oh, Bob Dylan, definitely. Absolutely.
I mean, in his case, he writes his stuff, so that gives him an edge. You know, Holiday. It's a thing that really distinguishes all these people from her from all these people is that she was far more experimental, I think, and far riskier in what she did, and to the point that some very respectable people have made bad mistakes in judging her. I can't think of the song. I want to say Back in Your Own Backyard, but it's a song from that era where she repeats the same note 26 times. Now, you don't have to hear it to know that doesn't sound like a good career move. Yes, it's true. So it'd be like that, not rap. It's just, it's just hitting it. But then something weird happens where the song is supposed to go up to its highest note. She goes to the lowest note. And when it's supposed to go to the lowest, she goes to the highest note. So if you ignore that, you don't see that connection. She says, drones you along in that, and suddenly, bam, she's reversed it. And to point to an instrumental example, which is what I'm really getting at, is how she's thinking instrumentally, is that Miles Davis's My Funny Valentine on the live Carnegie Hall, sorry to mention that, album, where he starts by playing with no vibrato and very straight. It sounds like a kid. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. And then when it's supposed to go up, he goes down to the point where the trumpet really doesn't go. Blah, 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 blah. And then there's a long bar and a 3/4 where nothing happens. So live, I'm just thinking people say bar and 3/4 is a lot of time. You're sitting staring at some, has he lost his way? And suddenly he's getting a tone which requires him to play on, I won't get into detail, but he's using the wrong fingering and forcing the tone out. So it's as if you say, well, I know how this is supposed to go, but I'm going to do it the hard way. It's back before trumpets had valves on them or something, you just had to get up there and do it. So in about one chorus, he's broken all the rules there are. And yet that's a song that everybody would know, and they knew where it would go, or they could figure it out. And he's taken it out of the idea of what is it? I don't know. He would do the same thing again with, now who would record songs from Oklahoma but Miles Davis? You know, I mean, he recorded Sir with a Fringe on Top, but it's played so slow, it doesn't even sound like a horse moving. Mm. Or Bye Bye Blackbird, which may be ironic or not, I don't know. He plays fast, too fast, and leaves out the hook, da 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 da, da 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 da, nothing. So this kind of editing, and everyone will say, of course, that Billie Holiday never sang the same song the same way. And you can check it yourself. I mean, she also sang songs that are really hard to sing that people don't particularly like, that were minor songs, and if she hadn't recorded it, no one would. Where her diction, her accuracy is just uncanny. And I'm trying to think of one. Well, it's a good thinking one because they're so obscure songs, but a song where any singer could go off at the next bar because of the way that's moving, and she hits them right on the nose. And I'm sure audiences never appreciated that. She did. Many of those songs is among her favorites because she'd done them well. Now, do we have singers at this level? Do we have singers who even can sing an entire song without being on the beat once? I mean, how do you do that? And it's not what it appears to be. If you were really doing that, you'd still be singing when the band quit. So somehow she's got to compress the song back to come back again. This is I think he's talking about Willie Nelson in a sense, right?
She always gets where she's supposed to get. She always gets there. And she also, one of the things I love doing is listening to Herbie Nichols play on piano the song that would become Lady Sings the Blues. He's the composer. He wrote it. She heard it, and then she recorded it. And I always think, oh my goodness, like how did she hear that out of that? Like how, it made me understand what it meant when they said she would own a song and recreate it and basically rewrite it in a way, while maintaining the integrity of the song. So yeah, I think she manages to do all of that.
Well, it sounds like
The crack about Frank Sinatra. Yes, he did some bad songs, but so did Billy did some bad songs. But they never sound bad.
No,
Frank Sinatra really sounded bad.
Billy's don't sound bad.
I don't want to assume anything, but maybe he just thought it's not worth bothering. But she bothers. I'm going to take this bad. What would be a really weak song by her? Moonlight, the boat in the moonlight, and you.
Yeah. Or your mother's son-in-law.
Yeah. Those are not very interesting songs, but they're interesting when she does them, or the way she'll take any phrase in "Fooling Myself," for example, where she's lagging way behind the beat and suddenly says, I look at the looking glass and I say, "How do, you fool, you're driving me insane." Those spondes spitting out, she's catching up with the beat. It's been dragging all along. That's, I suppose somebody would say, well, that's just natural. Well, I'd like to find somebody who's natural out there who could do that. You drive yourself crazy trying to do it.
Well, I think we're all going to go home or stay home and listen to some Willie Nelson to try to hear this out. I'm so grateful that you came. I'm so excited by your work. These two books are just so special to me. And I think, they kind of, along with the autobiography, along with the book of her late interviews, really give a full picture and also just an opening to how we can even imagine, how we can conceptualize, how we can sort of reckon with Billie Holiday as a figure, as a person, and as a being who has really, in a lot of ways, stayed alive. I know that's so corny to say, but she is. So I just want to say thank you for that. But before we go, because I know that you're both working on books, I saw on social media a little tidbit about yours, Dr. Griffin. Would you both just let us know what you're working on?
Well, I'm working on nothing now. I did finish a book this summer that will be out in September. And it's a kind of hybrid book that's part memoir and part kind of literary and cultural analysis about Black life and literature and culture, grounded in my own sort of, my own story, or the story of the people who raised me, I'll say, not so much about me.
And Dr. Szwed?
Finish your book on Harry Smith, and those who know him will know what I'm talking about. Those who don't won't. I wanted a challenge, and he was as difficult a challenge I could get, except the next book I want to do is Max Roach. And some really talented writers tried to write books on Max Roach, including Mary Baraka and some others, and they didn't finish them. So that's, and there's 117 feet of Max Roach material in the Library of Congress to go through.
Wow, I can't wait for that. I cannot wait for that.
You better wait.
Well, here are the images of these two great books that really, first of all, I mean, I understood the biography, John, and just how corrective it was for me in a lot of ways in terms of what I thought I knew. But then, Dr. Griffin, I didn't know what genre this even, I was like, are these meditations?
It's a good word.
What? Is that a good word?
Meditations. Let's call them meditations. Yes.
It's like meditations, and like now I'm thinking about Billie Holiday, and I'm thinking about haunting, this word that you use over and over again, which I think it's just such a great intervention in the way that we think about artists and the way that we also think about cultural figures who exist outside of ourselves in some ways. So I want to thank you both for those works. If you are watching today, please go and get these books, discuss them with your friends, and let's keep the conversation about Billie Holiday, her music, and her legacy ongoing, and with a level of consideration and imagination and vigilance, even about not just the hard, cold facts of it all, but where our imagination can lead us if we really let her sit inside of us and if we really sit with her music and her story. So both of you have done that for me. I hope everybody had a good time tonight. I definitely did. Happy anniversary to this concert, 75 years. We're going on with our centennial. So I want to let everybody know that in 2 weeks, on March 2nd, we will be talking about Marian Anderson. Marian Anderson, as many of you already know, was the first African-American classical performer to perform a solo lead role at the Metropolitan Opera. There's so much more to say about her, including her trips abroad, her incredible artistry. I mean, there's just so much to say, but most important, I would say, is that she debuted at the Town Hall in 1924. So we will be talking about that debut. But I'm so excited to say that we will be speaking about this debut with Rob Rapley, who is the producer of the new documentary on PBS about Marian Anderson, Voice of Freedom. Go ahead and find it and watch it, and then come back in 2 weeks and we will speak to him about Marian Anderson, about her legacy, about her archive, and about, of course, the memory of all the work that she did in this world. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the team at the Town Hall who made this program possible, Jeff and Alex and Larry and our board and everybody. If you like what you saw and you'd like to support the Town Hall and programs like these, please visit thetownhall.org/donate. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our newsletter. Keep an eye out for a program later next month on Antonia Brito and for a festival celebrating the great Toni Cade Bambara. Thank you so much and have a great night.